The app on my phone buzzed at 2:14 in the morning, and for 3 full seconds I thought Mason had climbed out of his crib again. My name is Ryan. I'm 34, I fix networks for a living, the kind of job where nobody thanks you unless something breaks, and for 6 years I've been married to a woman I would have sworn, right up until that spring, I understood completely. I sat up in the dark hotel room in Columbus, my laptop bag still by the door, and pulled up the monitor feed out of habit more than worry. Mason's crib was empty in the corner of the frame. That wasn't unusual. Danielle had been letting him fall asleep in our bed some nights when I traveled, said it was easier than fighting him back into his own room at 9 o'clock. I almost closed the app right there. Instead my thumb caught the swipe menu, and it opened onto a second camera feed I'd forgotten we still had synced, the one from the old monitor, the first one we ever bought, the one I'd moved down to the basement in March so Mason could supervise, while Derek Voss ripped out our water-damaged drywall. I'd meant to delete the login. I never got around to it. The basement light was on. That was the first thing that felt wrong, at that hour, on a Tuesday, in a house that should have had 2 sleeping people and a toddler in it. I want you to understand something about me before I tell you what I saw next. I am not a man who checks up on his wife. I never once, in 6 years, read a text message that wasn't shown to me first. I told myself that was respect. I'm not sure anymore it wasn't something else, a fear of finding out I was right about something I didn't want to be right about. I watched the screen for 11 seconds before I understood what I was looking at. I didn't call her name. I didn't throw the phone. I sat very still on the edge of a hotel bed 2 hours from home, and something in my chest folded in on itself like a building coming down floor by floor, quiet, controlled, nothing you'd hear from the street. I would spend the next 6 weeks learning that the version of my marriage I'd been living in for the better part of a year had never really existed at all, and that the son we'd bought that monitor to protect was about to become, without meaning to, the reason I finally saw the truth I'd spent months refusing to look at directly. 3 months earlier, none of this would have made sense to me, and that's the part that still catches in my throat when I think about it, how ordinary everything looked from the inside. We'd bought the house on Winthrop Avenue 2 years after Mason was born, a squat brick colonial in a Dayton suburb called Kettering, the kind of street where the mail carrier waves and everyone's grass is cut on the same Saturday rhythm. Danielle had left her marketing job at a logistics firm downtown when her maternity leave ran out and the daycare math didn't add up, a decision we made together, on paper, though I know now that, together, mostly meant I proposed it and she went quiet in the specific way she went quiet when she was giving something up rather than choosing it. I worked long hours. I'd tell you that like it's an excuse, but it's just a fact. 12-hour days weren't unusual, and when a client had an incident, I could be gone for a week without much warning. Danielle used to joke that she was raising Mason with a co-parent she saw mostly on FaceTime. I laughed when she said it. I didn't examine why she kept saying it. The basement flooded in February, a burst pipe behind the water heater, and the insurance adjuster recommended a contractor named Derek Voss, who'd redone half the finished basements in our zip code and had the kind of easy, unbothered competence that made homeowners trust him fast. He was 38, divorced, built like a man who did his own labor instead of just quoting it. He started showing up 3 mornings a week in March. I met him twice. Both times he was polite, asked about my work, complimented the network setup I'd rigged for our smart home devices. I remember thinking he seemed like a decent guy to have around the house while I was gone. I remember thinking that, specifically, more than once, which tells you something about how confident I was that nothing needed watching. Danielle started wearing her hair down on renovation days. I noticed it the way you notice a song on the radio, present, unremarkable, gone from your mind 30 seconds later. She'd laugh more on the phone with her sister those weeks, a lighter sound I hadn't heard consistently since before Mason was born, and I remember being glad of it, actually glad, the way you're glad to see color come back into someone's face after they've been sick. I didn't think about it again until 3 days later, when I found her phone face down on the kitchen counter for the second time that week, and something in me noted it and set it aside without deciding what the note meant. There's a specific kind of quiet that lives inside a marriage where both people have stopped asking each other real questions. Maybe you know it. It isn't hostile. It isn't even sad, most days. It just sits there, taking up the space where curiosity used to be, and you call it comfort because the other word is harder to say out loud. I want to be honest about my part in this, because it would be easy to tell you this story as something that happened to me. It didn't only happen to me. I'd stopped asking Danielle how her days actually felt sometime around Mason's first birthday. I asked what he ate, whether he napped, whether the pediatrician appointment went fine. I stopped asking what any of it cost her. I told myself I was giving her space. I was giving her silence, and there's a difference I didn't understand yet. The first real crack came on a Thursday in late March. I got home earlier than expected, an afternoon meeting had cancelled, and found Derek's truck still in the driveway at 6:15, well past when he usually wrapped for the day. Danielle was in the kitchen when I came in, and she startled at the sound of the door in a way that made me stop in the entryway for half a second before I could name why. "He's just finishing the trim," she said, before I'd asked anything at all. I hadn't asked. I filed that away too, the way you file away a receipt you're sure you'll need later and then can't find when you go looking. By April, the basement was 3 weeks behind schedule, and I'd stopped commenting on it, because every time I did, Danielle had an answer ready before I finished the sentence: a supply delay, a subfloor issue, a permit hiccup with the county. I'm an engineer. I notice when explanations arrive too fast, too complete, with no gaps in them for genuine uncertainty. I noticed it. I didn't do anything with the noticing. Mason had started saying a new word that spring, dare, which took us both a confused week to realize was his 2-year-old attempt at Derek. He said it the way he said the names of people he liked. Danielle laughed the first time, said it was sweet that he'd bonded with someone new. I laughed too. I want to be honest that in the moment, it really did seem sweet. I traveled to Cincinnati for 4 days in the second week of April, a client migration that ran long. Danielle texted me updates about Mason each night: bath time, a tantrum over broccoli, a new word. Normal. Warm, even. On the third night, at 9:40, she texted that she was wiped, heading to bed early, and then I saw the little gray dots that meant she was still typing something else. They appeared for almost a minute. Nothing came through. I remember staring at my own phone screen in a hotel room, waiting for a message that never arrived, and telling myself she'd probably just gotten distracted, put the phone down, fallen asleep mid-thought the way tired parents do. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever laid in a hotel bed 2 states away from your own life, watching 3 gray dots appear and disappear on a screen, waiting for words that never came, you already know the specific, low-grade dread that lives in that kind of silence. It isn't panic. It's smaller than that. It's a held breath you don't notice you're holding until much later. I let it go. I told myself I was being paranoid, that 4 years of marriage had made me the kind of husband who invented problems out of boredom on business trips. That was, I think now, the first moment I actively chose not to look, not because I trusted her completely, but because looking felt like a door I wasn't ready to walk through. She told me, much later, what that night had actually been. I'd started the message 4 times. I kept deleting it. I wanted to tell him, not you, Ryan, him, that we needed to stop, that it had gone somewhere I never meant for it to go, that I was scared of what I was becoming and more scared of what I'd lose if anyone found out. Every time I typed it, I imagined actually sending it, actually meaning it, and something in me pulled back like touching a stove. I told myself it was the last time. I told myself that a lot that month. I put the phone down because I was crying and didn't want you to hear it through 400 miles of silence. That's what she told me. I knew none of it yet. 2 weeks later, Mason's daycare co-op mom, a woman named Priya who lived 2 streets over and whose son played with ours on weekends, mentioned to me at pickup, casually, the way you mention weather, that she'd seen Danielle and the contractor guy getting coffee at the place on Far Hills the previous Tuesday, just chatting, looked like a nice break for her, honestly. She smiled when she said it. She meant nothing by it. I smiled back and said something about how Danielle deserved a break from a toddler all day, and I meant that too, in the moment. If I had asked one more question at that coffee shop mention instead of changing the subject to Priya's own renovation plans, everything that followed might have arrived on a different, gentler schedule. It didn't. I let it pass like weather. That same week, my sister Kelly, who'd never fully warmed to Danielle, something I'd always privately chalked up to sisterly overprotectiveness rather than instinct, called to ask, out of nowhere, whether things were okay at home. I asked why she was asking. She said she couldn't explain it, just a feeling from something Danielle had posted and deleted within an hour on social media, a caption about feeling like myself again for the first time in years, under a photo that had since vanished. I told Kelly she was reading into nothing. Some small, cowardly part of me didn't want her to be right, so I made sure I wasn't either. The basement work finished in the first week of May. Derek's truck stopped appearing in the driveway. Danielle seemed, for about 10 days after that, unmistakably lower, quieter at dinner, slower to laugh, staring at her phone longer than the messages on it seemed to warrant. I told myself the renovation chaos had simply worn her down and she was decompressing. I didn't consider, not once in those 10 days, that what I was watching might be someone grieving something she couldn't name out loud. I didn't go looking for proof. That's the part of this that still sits strangely with me. I never once opened her phone, never checked her email, never did any of the things men do in the stories you hear about husbands who suspect. I wasn't investigating. I was traveling for work, running a 2-week security audit for a hospital system in Columbus that kept me overnight 3 nights that stretch, and it was on one of those nights, out of nothing but habit, that I opened the wrong camera feed. But before that night, there was one thing I noticed that I filed away without understanding, the kind of detail that only means something once you already know what you're looking at. In the last week of April, before the basement work wrapped, I found a receipt in the laundry from a home improvement store, Derek's, presumably, left in a pair of Danielle's jeans by accident, for a hotel room in Springfield, 40 minutes north, dated the previous Tuesday, the same day she told me she and Mason had gone to visit her cousin in Yellow Springs. I stood in the laundry room holding that receipt for a long time. I told myself contractors sometimes pick up materials near job sites, that maybe it was unrelated, a mixed-up bag, someone else's paper caught in the wash. I put it in a drawer instead of asking her about it directly. I've turned that decision over more times than I can count since, why I chose to file the doubt away instead of speaking it out loud the moment I felt it. Looking back now, that receipt was the moment I should have asked the question I kept avoiding. I didn't. I told myself I was being respectful of her privacy. I understand now that what I actually was afraid. Kelly called again in early May, this time with something less deniable. She'd run into Danielle downtown on a Wednesday afternoon, supposedly a pediatrician day, without Mason, coming out of a hotel lobby near the Oregon district looking, in Kelly's words, flushed and weird, and had said hello, and Danielle had frozen for a full 3 seconds before saying she'd just used the lobby restroom because the nearest Starbucks was full. Kelly didn't push it in the moment. She called me that night instead. I told her I'd talk to Danielle. I didn't, not directly. I asked, that weekend, in a roundabout way, whether she'd run into Kelly downtown, and Danielle said yes, quick coffee, nothing more, moved the conversation along before I could ask a second question. I let her move it. The subplot that mattered more than I understood at the time was Mason himself, and the growing list of small, specific things a 2-year-old says without any understanding of what he's revealing. In the second week of May, out of nowhere at breakfast, he asked, "Where'd Dare go?" Danielle told him Derek had finished fixing the basement and gone to fix someone else's house now. Mason looked, for a 2-year-old, genuinely sad about this. I remember thinking it was strange that a contractor had made that strong an impression on a toddler in 6 weeks, strange enough that I mentioned it to Danielle that night, half joking, that our son seemed more attached to Derek than to some of our actual friends. She laughed too fast and changed the subject to whether we should repaint the basement trim. She told me, much later, what that comment had done to her in the moment. "You said it so lightly. Like it was nothing." And I remember standing at the sink with my back to you, because I couldn't let you see my face, because you just said the truest sentence either of us had spoken in weeks and you had no idea you'd said it. I almost turned around and told you everything right there. I got as far as opening my mouth. Then Mason knocked his cup off the table and the moment just closed. I've wondered since if that was the last real door, the one I could have walked through on my own, before it stopped being my choice at all. That's what she told me. I had no idea, standing at that sink, how close I'd come to an answer I wasn't ready to hear. I didn't think about any of it again until 3 days later, on the second night of the hospital audit in Columbus, when I opened my phone out of nothing but habit and found the wrong camera feed still logged in from March. The 11 seconds I watched on that hotel bed didn't need explaining. That's the strange mercy of a fixed camera angle. It doesn't lie, doesn't equivocate, doesn't offer you the comfortable half-readings a suspicious mind sometimes settles for. I saw what I saw. Derek Voss's truck had never actually left the neighborhood the way I'd assumed. He'd been coming back, after dark, weeks after the renovation was supposedly finished, letting himself in through the basement's exterior door with a key I didn't know Danielle had given him. I didn't drive home that night. I sat with it. I'm not proud of that, but I needed to be a person who could speak in complete sentences before I saw her again, and I wasn't that person at 2 in the morning. I drove home the next day, Wednesday, arriving at 4 in the afternoon, a full day earlier than my itinerary said I would. Danielle was in the kitchen when I walked in. Mason was down for his nap. She looked up, and I watched her register that something was wrong before I'd said a single word, the particular stillness that comes over someone who has spent weeks half expecting this exact moment. I set my phone on the kitchen island, the video already pulled up, paused on a frame that needed no further evidence than itself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I want you to look at this, I said. And then I want you to explain it to me. Not tonight's version. Not the version you've been giving me for 2 months. What actually happened, from the beginning. She looked at the screen for 4 seconds and then looked away from it, out toward the window, and I watched her decide, in real time, which version of the truth she was going to hand me. It's not what it looks like, she started, and then stopped herself, hearing how it sounded even as she said it. That's not, okay. It happened. It's been happening. But it's smaller than that timestamp makes it look. It was maybe 4 times, total. It was never, I never meant for it to become anything. He was leaving. It was already ending on its own, before you found this. I want to be honest that a part of me almost believed her, standing there. She was calm, specific, gave me just enough truth wrapped around what I'd later learn was a smaller number than the real one, a shorter timeline than the actual one, enough to make the evidence in front of me feel accounted for. For about 4 days after that conversation, I believed I had the whole picture. I hadn't. She'd handed me half of it, carefully, and let me think it was everything. How long? I said. Not really a question. More a demand for a number. Since March, she said. Since the basement started. That part, at least, was true. I didn't yell. I want you to understand that, because I think people expect yelling in these moments, and what actually happened in me was quieter and, I think, worse. I felt something close all the way, methodically, the way you'd watch a heavy door swing shut on its own weight, no slam, just the click of the latch. I picked my phone back up off the counter. I need you to tell me exactly what happened, I said. Not the summary. All of it. I'm not doing this in pieces. She sat down at the kitchen table, and for the first time in the conversation, she looked less composed than she had a moment before, like the structure she'd built to deliver this to me was starting to strain under the actual weight of what she was carrying. It started on a Tuesday, she said, quiet now, no longer performing calm, just tired. He was running late finishing the subfloor and Mason was cranky and I brought coffee down for both of us because I felt bad he'd been working through lunch. We just talked. For maybe 20 minutes. And it was the first real conversation I'd had with an adult who wasn't asking me something or needing something from me in probably 8 months. I went upstairs afterward and I felt this, I don't even know what to call it. Awake. Like something in me had been asleep and it just opened its eyes for 20 minutes and then had to go back to sleep because I had a toddler to feed. I said nothing. She kept going. I told myself it was nothing, obviously. I told myself that for weeks, actually, that I was just lonely, that it would pass, that having one conversation that made me feel like a person instead of a function wasn't a crime. I didn't plan for it to become anything. I want you to know that, even if you don't believe it. There wasn't a moment where I decided to have an affair. There were about a dozen small moments where I decided not to stop something, and I kept telling myself each one was the last one. I want to stop here, because this is the part that's harder to explain than the betrayal itself, the part where I recognized, even furious, even grieving in real time at my own kitchen table, that I understood exactly how a person could arrive somewhere they never intended to go, one small permission at a time. I didn't excuse it. I understood it. Those two things sat in me at once and neither one canceled the other out. What did you tell yourself, the first time it became more than talking? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. That it would be the only time. That's what everyone tells themselves, I think, and it's still true in the moment you're telling it to yourself. I remember standing in our own basement, in our house, in daylight, thinking, this doesn't count if it never happens again. And then it happened again, and I told myself the same thing, and somewhere in there I stopped believing it and kept saying it anyway, because the alternative was admitting what I actually was now. That was as far as she went that afternoon. She didn't cry, not really, a single unsteady breath, nothing more, and when I asked her to keep going, to tell me the rest, she said she couldn't, not yet, not all at once, and something in her face told me she meant it, that what she was withholding wasn't strategy anymore but something closer to shame she genuinely couldn't push past that day. I told her I needed her to sleep in the guest room. I said it once, without raising my voice, and I didn't repeat it. Mason woke from his nap 20 minutes later, and for the rest of that evening we were, on the surface, two functioning parents making dinner and giving a bath and reading 2 books instead of 1 because he asked twice. I understand now that this is what a marriage looks like in its last recognizable hours, the practice choreography still running even after the thing underneath it has already stopped. I called a lawyer 2 days later. Not out of vengeance, I want to be clear about that, because I know how that sentence can sound, but because I needed, more than anything else in that period, to be a person who was doing something instead of a person things kept happening to. The fuller truth came 10 days after the kitchen conversation, on an evening when Mason was asleep and Danielle asked if she could finally tell me the rest, the part she'd held back. We sat on the back porch, not the kitchen table this time, and she talked for a long time without much interruption from me beyond a question or two at the natural pauses. You asked what I told myself, the first time, she said. I need to tell you the rest of it, because I don't think you actually have the real shape of this yet, and I think you deserve it even though it doesn't make anything better. She was quiet a moment, gathering it. It wasn't 4 times. I told you 4 because 4 felt survivable to say out loud, and I was scared that if I told you the real number you'd never look at me again, and some small, stupid part of me was still hoping we could come back from this. It was closer to 15, over about 6 weeks. I know that number sounds worse. It is worse. I'm not going to keep rounding it down to protect myself anymore. The escalation happened faster than I want to admit. After that first conversation, I started finding reasons to bring coffee down more often, and I told myself that was just being a good hostess to someone doing hard physical work in my house. Then there was a day in late March when he said something about how he could tell I used to be someone before I became just somebody's mom, and I hated how much that landed, how starved I must have been to hear it, because it wasn't even a particularly kind thing to say about the last 2 years of my life, and I still went home and thought about it for days. I was scared constantly. Not of losing you, exactly, or not only that. I was scared of what it meant that I could do this and still function, still make Mason's lunch, still kiss you goodbye when you left for the airport. I started avoiding the fridge in the kitchen because Mason's drawings were taped to it and I couldn't look at them some mornings without feeling something close to sick. I'd sit in the car in the driveway sometimes for 5 extra minutes before coming inside, just trying to arrange my face into something you wouldn't ask questions about. There was a night in April, I almost stopped it myself. He said something about maybe leaving his wife eventually, someday, like that was a thing we were building toward, and it scared me so badly I didn't see him for 11 days after that. I told myself it was over. And then the basement work extended by 2 more weeks and he was back in the house and I let it start again, because apparently 11 days of feeling like myself again was easier to want back than 11 days of being ashamed was hard to sit with. The day Mason called him "Dare" at breakfast and you laughed about it, that was the closest I came to telling you everything, standing at that sink. I want you to know that. It wasn't your evidence that almost got the truth out of me first. It was that ordinary, kind moment, you not knowing what you'd said, that nearly broke it open on its own. I didn't let it. I've wondered since if that's the version of this where things might have actually turned out differently, not better, necessarily. Just honest, sooner, on my own terms instead of a camera's. I asked her, near the end, whether she loved him. She said no, immediately, and then took it back halfway, said she didn't know what to call 20 minutes a day of feeling like a person again, whether that counted as love or just its shape, borrowed from someone who happened to be standing in her basement at the right moment in a life that had quietly stopped including her as anyone but a function. I believed that answer more than I believed almost anything else she told me that summer. Derek Voss's business took a hit that Autumn Priya had mentioned, in her way, to 2 other homeowners on the co-op group chat what she'd pieced together, and word travels fast in a neighborhood built on shared driveways and shared daycare pickups. He lost at least one contract I know of directly because of it. His own marriage, I learned later, secondhand, the way you learn most things in a small suburb, had ended within the year, though I never knew and never asked whether ours was the reason or simply the one that finally surfaced what had already been cracking somewhere else. The divorce finalized in November. Danielle kept partial custody of Mason, which was right, which I never once tried to contest, because whatever she'd broken in our marriage, nothing in 6 weeks of a basement affair undid 6 years of being a real mother to our son. But I kept the house on Winthrop Avenue, kept the majority of what we'd built financially in those 6 years, and watched her move into a rental 2 miles away with considerably less than she'd walked into that marriage with. I didn't take those things out of anger. I took them because a lawyer laid out, plainly, what I was entitled to, and for the first time in a long while I let myself simply take what was mine instead of quietly absorbing a cost that wasn't. I could have stayed angry for a long time. I chose, somewhere in that autumn, not to. That was the only kind of revenge that ever actually mattered to me. I started sleeping through the night again sometime in January, and I remember noticing it specifically, not gradually, but as an actual morning where I woke up and realized the tightness I'd carried in my chest for the better part of a year simply wasn't there. I hadn't announced it to anyone. I just noticed the weight was gone. Mason still says "dare" sometimes, less often now, mostly when he's looking at an old photo from that spring. I've stopped flinching at it. Some things just become part of the record of a life instead of a wound in it, eventually. I'm not the same man who stood in a hotel room watching 11 seconds of video that ended a marriage. I'm quieter now, in a way I think is actually better than the quiet I used to mistake for peace. I ask more questions. I've learned, slowly, that silence isn't the same thing as trust, and that noticing something and choosing not to look at it is its own kind of decision, one I'm not willing to make again. The most painful detail in this isn't the affair itself, it's that Danielle nearly told Ryan the truth, unprompted, standing at her own kitchen sink, weeks before a camera ever forced the issue, and the moment simply closed because a toddler knocked a cup off a table. That single detail says more about how betrayals actually end than any confrontation scene can. Most affairs don't survive because the guilty party is skilled at deception. They survive because everyone around them, including the person being deceived, keeps unconsciously making it easier not to ask the question that would end it. Ryan's workaholic distance and Danielle's quiet erosion of identity didn't cause the affair. Nothing forces someone into another person's bed, but they built the exact conditions where loneliness could be mistaken, however briefly, for love. What's notable is how ordinary the actual mechanism was, not a grand seduction, but 20 minutes of feeling seen by someone who wasn't asking her for anything, repeated until it became a habit she couldn't justify stopping and couldn't admit to starting. The receipt in the laundry functions almost as a symbol for the entire marriage's failure mode, evidence discovered, then filed away rather than confronted, because confrontation was more frightening than uncertainty. Ryan's real failure wasn't inattention. It was choosing, repeatedly, the comfort of not knowing over the risk of finding out. Danielle's failure was mistaking secrecy for kindness, telling herself that protecting Ryan from the truth was different from simply protecting herself from consequences. What ultimately separates this story from a simple morality tale is that neither party is rendered as purely a villain or a victim. Danielle's monologue reveals someone who understood, even mid-affair, exactly what she was doing and exactly what it cost. There's no self-delusion by the end, only a woman finally willing to say the real number instead of the survivable one. Ryan's restraint at the confrontation, his refusal to perform rage he didn't feel, reads less like control and more like a man who'd already spent a year absorbing smaller wounds and had simply run out of room to be surprised. The marriage didn't end in that basement. It ended, more accurately, in 100 small moments across 2 years where two people stopped asking each other the questions that mattered, and started calling that silence a kind of peace.